Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Political No Brainer podcast, where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. Today's topics, and I love to cover the topics, is the SAVE Act. Beth thought I was a little confused on the initial Save America, but the SAVE Act, Iran, and then the free fall of the economy, which we are in a free fall. But we're going to cover all that. I'm not going to over. But I guess we'll start. I think let's start with the SAVE Act. This is gerrymandering on steroids. The SAVE Act is gerrymandering on steroids. This is a situation where we're literally really making it difficult for voters to vote. And then what happens is, and granted, it's our own complicity, but what happens is you lose Democratic voters. They're not as adamantly dedicated to voting as conservatives. So comes this SAVE Act, comes all these regulations, and we'll just, anybody can jump in at any minute in time. I'm just doing the initial introduction. Comes the president, and even conservative senators are pushing back on the idea of the SAVE Act. But let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about the SAVE Act that's in the Senate right now that probably will hopefully be not prevail, but let's talk about it.
Well, from my understanding, the SAVE Act was not only just making it more difficult for women who have been married and took their husband's name, but also that the federal government would be able to seize ballots and voter information, maybe not ballots, but voter information. And at some point, they look through these ballots either monthly or yearly and can just purge anyone they want without reason. Am I close to what the SAVE Act is doing?
This is one of the aspects of it, and it's enormous. The SAVE Act is enormous in its approach. So we're dating back to sort of like, just using an example. In Texas, you can use a gun carrying permit as a valid ID to vote, whereas you can't use a state ID as a valid ID to vote. So you go into that whole Hatfield and McCoy thing where, you know, generally lower income people have a state ID versus they don't generally have the money to go to the expense of getting a gun carrying permit. And like you said, when you're talking about women that have taken on their husband's name, there could add this air of confusion as far as the SAVE Act is concerned. And again, you're talking about the conservatives being more well versed in the idea of being sure they're able to vote versus the lower income people who will go to the polls and say, "Oh, I didn't even realize this was an issue. I am Mrs. Adriana Rabinowitz. I am not. I no longer have my maiden name." And ultimately, I see that as benefiting the conservative voters. I see this whole SAVE Act as an attempt to secure more conservative votes and preclude more liberal votes. And I don't know, Kevin, do you have an idea of other specifics of the SAVE Act? I can jump right into my computer right here and talk more about.
Wasn't I just looked it up. It was proof of citizenship requirement, which would make women who are married that change their name require a U.S. passport to vote, and changes to voter registration that applies when first registering, updating info, the address, the name, and party. So states cannot register someone without citizen documents, and impacts online and mail registration. It could limit or overhaul online registration systems and disrupt mail-in registration. And voter roll and enforcement. So it audits. That's what I was saying about they can audit voter rolls and remove suspected non-citizens. And since we've, with the ICE detentions and picking, U.S. citizens off the streets, I'm not sure I trust the American government to figure out who is and who isn't a U.S. citizen, seeing as we've, completely bombed that with ICE.
Yeah, I hear you, Beth. Okay. So on the surface of it, so the devil's going to be in the details, is what Beth is getting to in terms of how we're going to apply this, right? I mean, on the black letter of it is the idea of requiring proof of citizenship when it is the law that you have to be a citizen in order to vote. That is the law, right? Right. So requiring proof of citizenship, right, in order to vote is only enforcing the law. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Yes, but in the transitional period, for all types of economic reasons, based on how historically we've allowed people to register, it is now enforcing the fact that you have to prove you're a U.S. citizen, right? Does start to have a disparate impact on poorer populations who often don't have possess proof of citizenship, even though they were born here, right? So what mechanisms that people are going that interested people in making sure that everyone who should be able to vote can still vote is that we're going to have to implement new systems, right? So yes, all the third party vendor methodologies for voter registration. You used to be able to register to vote with your library card. All the anytime change of address, you move locations and you could register to vote. So we made it very, very easy to register to vote. This is going to necessarily restrict that. I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem would be that if you make it harder to register and you don't come up with new systems that help people to clear that hurdle, then you're going to have the disparate impact that most people who oppose what is this called, the SAVE Act, right? Who oppose it? It's because that's what they think. They think it's cherry picking who gets to vote, right? And so the devil's in the details. I don't trust the government one bit. I just want you. My criticism is this: the partisanship, whether it's progressive partisanship or conservative partisanship, whether it's Democratic partisanship or Republican partisanship, is completely toxic. It totally poisons both how the legislation is seen and how it's going to be applied. So if Trump gets this passed, it's going to be applied in a very pro conservative, very pro MAGA way. Okay. And when a Democrat follows up, they're going to take the same legislation, which is written to be that flexible, and they're going to apply it in a very progressive way. Okay. I mean, and that is not good. What we need laws that are applied consistently, regardless of whether or not it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House or in control of the Senate, or control of the Congress. And this is the problem. We've politicized everything, and everything is not political. Disaster relief is not political. Whether you should vote in an election is not political, right? But we've made it political, and it's horrible. It's destroying our democracy.
Well, that goes back a decade. I mean, that goes back for a long time. I mean,
yes, it does.
Women used
this is not
the
a new
suffrage,
problem, but it's worse under Trump. It's worse under Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, like when we think realistically about how many, it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote. It's already, and the way they talk like, well, there was 220,000 illegal immigrants voting. I think there were like 22 in the 2020.
Yeah, there was no right. See
before election.
You're right, Beth. In terms of voter fraud, there's almost no cases. I mean, when you're talking about 150 million people voted in 2024. Okay, yeah, it's almost no proven cases. It's like the 22. I mean, out of that many. So I agree with you. The problem is we do not have a voter fraud problem. Full stop. And anyone who says we do is just pulling it out of their butt. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I do. I feel like it is simply to Trump just sent in his mail-in ballot yesterday for Florida. Florida just passed a voting law that the ID requirement that you have to have, a birth certificate or a passport that proves that you're a citizen, because the real ID that they promised would prove doesn't. And they're trying to ban mail-in ballots. And my dad votes mail-in. He's elderly. He's not going to go stand in a line. And that you would think about with Florida, most of the elderly are Republican here. So you would think that would destroy the Republicans just as much. So we'll see. I guess how it goes in the or Senate, because I think that's what's holding it up right now. But it passed in the House, which is unbelievable.
The thing is, for the mail-in ballots, the same hurdle exists. It's just that you have to prove your citizenship in order to be able to. I mean, in other words, we're talking the threshold is at voter registration. You know how you vote, whether you walk into a booth or whether you mail in a ballot, is not the threshold. So for your dad, however he has validated his registration to vote, right? The SAVE Act is saying you got to prove you're a citizen, and so he will do that. He will provide whatever the proof. I mean, birth
Yes, of
certificate.
course. Every
And so therefore
single
he will still be able to do a mail-in ballot. It's not it's the registration that that the SAVE Act is addressing. It's not how you vote. you know.
Well, no, I mean, if they intend to ban mail-in voting, then yes, it would
Oh, no,
disenfranchise
that's a
elderly
different thing, and I don't see what does that have to do. Mail-in voting has nothing to do with whether you are authorized to vote.
because that's
It simply
where
doesn't.
the argument of fraud comes in. That they're stolen ballots, people steal ballots, they send them in and they get counted. I mean, I think his arguments are ridiculous. However, needing to register to vote, I think it was good every 2 or 4 years in
Two
Florida.
years, 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be every year. So every year you have to make sure that you have those documents, and every year you have to make sure that you register to vote, and every year you have to make sure that you have to go on and make sure you haven't been purged from the voter rolls if this
Yeah,
act
I totally
passes.
disagree with the purging thing, but what is that all about? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if the way we purge the voter rolls is that proof of citizenship was not established at voter registration, then I actually don't have a problem with that. If you are now making that the rule, but you're going to have some phase-in period of time where everyone has a chance to go and prove that you're a citizen because we didn't have that standard before. So if they're creating a new standard to say, okay, yes, you have to prove your citizenship in order to register to vote, okay, and you give people adequate time to do that, right? Then if you have a voter who's registered and there is no validation of citizenship on file, I think that's appropriate to say you could purge that. But I don't. But you can't purge it because Pablo. You look at the name and you say, well, Pablo's not an American citizen because that's insane. How do you look at someone's
Well,
name and say not
insane
an
is
American?
actually commonplace now.
Well,
It's
With
right.
it,
this
I'll
regime.
say it's just as American is Sydney. I mean, come on, right? But
It
so
is.
I agree. I mean, we have to. These arguments are just ridiculous, and I agree with you, Beth.
so let me jump into about ridiculous argument. I had Alan Hayes, who is the supervisor of elections for Lake County, and I can agree with him on so many things. He said Lake County, Florida, is the gold standard of voting policy and really voting, um, just making sure we're doing it right. The gold standard, the gold star. And he talked about purging, which can be a necessary tool. He talked about mail-in voting. He talked about how they verify signatures, how the people that verify signatures are trained into verifying signatures, the swirls and the curves and it's we've got an efficient system in place in many parts of the country. When you when Trump is the messenger of the SAVE Act, or when Trump is the messenger of many things, it ultimately results in controversy. There was a Trump appointed postmaster general who ordered a brand new sorting machine delivered to a very busy post office. That postmaster general ordered that brand new sorting machine thrown in the trash in the dumpster out back. It's a real story. You can Google it. There has been Trump attempts to ambush mail-in voting. It doesn't work for him necessarily. And so we're always concerned. Is the concern valid? I say absolutely yes. Is there a polarization of the concern that it's all anti Trump? Not necessarily. There is a concern about his approach in everything he does. Period. Hard stop, like Kevin says, hard stop. Everything he does, there's a concern. When it comes to the SAVE Act, there is he's the one that presents the narrative. Joe Biden allowed in 1 million illegal immigrants and they all voted. Joe Biden did let in 1 million illegal immigrants. That has been a fact that he opened the borders and it was sort of like a shit show. And we all agree, I believe we all agree, it should have never happened. But did they vote? My answer is no. My answer is no. They did not change the dynamics of the election results. Does Trump tell the story better than anybody? Well, sure. He's the president. My podcast doesn't have near the polarization his presidency has. So he continues to tell people that the Biden approach to letting 1 million illegal immigrants or however millions cross the border. And again, I interviewed a very dedicated man to the border. His name was well, right now I can't remember his name, but I do have his book right here. So give me 1 second. His name, a very dedicated person to the cause of the border, Hope on the Border by Gil Gillenwater. He talked about the 1 million people that did cross the border illegally, but I don't believe he thinks they voted either. So we get into this sense of urgency via the Trump sense of urgency that we passed the SAVE Act. The issue is, like you said, the devils are in the detail. Is there even a necessity to have another voting? Trump has been clear on the phone calls with Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, gerrymandering, 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 gerrymandering. The Supreme Court has ruled on gerrymandering numerous times. It generally doesn't work in the favor of conservative hopes and dreams. But let's get you guys jump right back in. Tell me, maybe I rambled too long, but the whole idea of the SAVE Act, to me, I just wish it were gone. I wish the issue of it passing the Senate was already over.
So you think it should not pass, Coach, or you think
I
it should pass?
I think it should not pass. I think it's extremely counterproductive to
I
fair
agree.
voting.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's sort of like disenfranchising low income people who can't afford to get a passport. I think it's like $160 now in Florida to get a passport nationally. People can't afford. I have a neighbor who can't get his kid's birth certificate to enroll them in school because of he was never put on the birth certificate and the mother passed away. And just getting this birth certificate, he's got to hire an attorney and apparently people to sign or fill out this paperwork because it's too much legal jumbo for him, and he doesn't have money to hire an attorney just to get his kid enrolled in a public school. Like, this is crazy. Like, we find these little problems and we make mountains out of them.
You
I
know,
agree 100%.
as far as I'm concerned, we are still free to make sure that people who have limited resource can validate that they're citizens. And in other words, so if my approach is if they pass it, if it does pass, right, that does not disenfranchise any American who's legally able to vote. What it does do is create a hurdle that that are going to impact disproportionately poor, lower income Americans. And so what we need to do is help those people, and we can do that. We both publicly and privately, in terms of private sector, public sector, we can do that. And that solves the problem. Because at the end of the day, no one is arguing that a non-citizen should be able to vote. So therefore, if we can clear the hurdle that everyone who is a citizen, no matter how much money you have in your pocket, right, would be able to vote, even if the SAVE Act passes, then it's not a problem. Okay? And that's what I'm saying. And yes, I understand the intent of the people who are pushing it is to have the disparate impact. I agree. I think it's awful. But they are not codifying that in the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act itself is neutral. It's only enforcing the actual law, right? And it's incumbent on us to make sure that any American can vote. And I support that. So I'm not worried about this. To me, it is a problem if it passes and we do nothing, and all of a sudden 10 million Americans are disenfranchised because they don't have a way to prove their citizenship that they could afford. That would be horrible, right? But it's on us to do something about that. That's a fixable problem. That's not like the housing affordability crisis. So that's my thought.
I
Yeah, I
completely.
mean, go ahead.
Save.
Sorry.
No, no, go ahead, Beth. I'd rather you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I would completely
Yeah.
agree with you if it weren't if I would ask, well, why aren't we enforcing the laws now? I mean, aren't we? Didn't we find the 22 people who didn't vote? Didn't we find them? And you know what I mean? So like, so this is exactly what is keeping our TSA workers from work. Am I wrong?
This
Like,
is
this is what is keeping the bottleneck and passing the SAVE Act. And Senate is not going to pass it with what they need, and the TSA workers are not getting paid. So it is kind of a bigger deal for something that nobody wants to budge on.
It's all the Trump antics. It's just that. It's all the Trump. The SAVE Act is Trump antics. It's whether it passes or it doesn't pass. And my feeling is that it won't pass. There's simply senators who believe the SAVE Act. There's conservative senators who believe there's many low-income people that will vote for them. So
Mm-hmm.
there's Beth has just said something very important. This individual that's having trouble getting his child's birth certificate is also having trouble making his rent. He's got to make a choice between going to work or showing up at another government office for 2 hours, grabbing a little ticket like you used to do at the butcher shop, and waiting
Mm-hmm.
on a call to come to a counter for an employee that's going to tell him there's nothing we can really do today, but we're glad you came.
Yeah.
And and then like you said, to cut through the thick red tape takes a lawyer, which he probably doesn't even have the money to do. And this isn't about voting. This is about this gentleman getting his child's birth certificate to go on with his child's life, including school, including some sort of subsidized health care, if not Medicaid. I have no idea who this man is or what his financial status is, but we are bogging down people with all sides of government regulation when in fact the political party of the Republicans is the ones that say they hate regulation. And we've argued the point to death that Joe Biden was not the greatest president in the world. He let a lot of things happen that simply shouldn't have happened. We argued the point that Kamala Harris was not the candidate of choice, and the only reason she was the candidate of choice is because Joe Biden hung in there too long and
Mm-hmm.
entirely too it just looked like a fool hanging in there too long. So we got Trump by default. But has everybody endorsed the notion of Trump being the savior of America? I haven't endorsed that notion at all. I do believe there was need for change. I don't believe there was need for the wrecking ball Trump brought into office with him. Uh, and so the SAVE Act is a big part of that wrecking ball that we're just gonna make it harder for people to vote.